I'm going to show 5 techniques of watercolor painting which you can choose to use when you are painting your watercolor project. You can test these for yourself on pieces of scrap watercolor paper before you decide which technique or techniques would work best for your project. One technique is called wet on wet. This is a technique where you get the paper wet with clear water, and then you choose a color or multiple colors in order to create a painted area. The paint will stay within the bounds of the color or colors that you choose. See how it spreads out and it looks really nice? This can create lovely kind of natural color mixes and also create some in-between shades that may be difficult to capture in those lightest tones. So that's wet on wet. You paint with water first, and then you paint with the color. Wet on dry is the traditional colors and ways that we think of painting. You simply dip in the water, touch your paint, and paint on your paper. This is really great if you need controlled, hard edges. You need to know exactly where things are going. You need to have smaller details. All of these can be done with wet on dry. This is also a great way to go on top of another area that you've already painted with a lighter wash, like a wet on wet, and then go back in and add additional detail information or additional colors. So wet on wet ends up being very soft. Wet on dry ends up being much harder and crisper. Another technique is called dry brush. And this technique happens when you have your brush and you get your color on it, but then you get off most of the excess water. So you can do that by squeezing out the water. You can also use a paper towel to dry it, like this one I've got here. This is a technique that will damage your brush if you're not being careful. So I'm going to make sure I'm pretty loaded with color. I'm going to dry off the bristles of my brush. This is a really great technique for adding texture to your artwork. If you need grass, if you need fur, this is a really great technique for creating some depth or texture in your work. Get the color, then dry it off. And you're painting then with just the very tips or tips of the bristles of the brush. We'll come back to wrap. I'm going to show you how you can fix a mistake that you make when you're watercolor painting. Let's say you painted something and you painted it blue, but you made a mistake. So there's a couple of ways of fixing watercolor. The first way is to simply dry that area off with a paper towel. If you are soon enough and it hasn't set, sometimes that's all you need. Sometimes you take a little clear water and rub over the oops area. Just back and forth. And then you take that paper towel and you dry it off again. This generally will help lighten any oops mistake areas and allow you to fix them. It isn't perfect, but it does allow new paint to be painted around or on top of places where you made a mistake. The last technique I'm going to show is wrap. So this is where you use a piece of plastic cling wrap right before the end of class, and you cover very, very wet paint with the cling wrap to create an interesting dried effect. This is not recommended for small detail things that you need to keep in a specific area. This is recommended for light wash colors like backgrounds or filling other larger spaces. You want to start with something very, very wet. Then you take the cling wrap and you put it on top. I'm gonna add a little bit of blue to kind of stay consistent with my theme here. Okay, so I'm gonna take that cling wrap, sort of scrunch it up, and put it on top. You can see already that it has started to kind of dry or smoosh out in an interesting way. You want to do that and then leave it alone. You go put it on the drying rack with the cling wrap on it, and it will dry this way, and you will see what it looks like when it's dry.